Well, if you bet NCAA or NFL football, this should be an interesting discussion Ron and I are going to have this week because we're going to be bopping around on a lot of different issues. Some quick hitters, some from Discord questions, some Ron wants to talk about, some I want to talk about. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to get right into it. We're not going to sell you anything, and we're not going to chat about our private lives. We're not going to bore you with nonsense like the other shows do. Ron, you sent me an email. You sent some topics of discussion. First and foremost was having to do with how do we handicap the NCAA.
Okay, Chris, good afternoon. I thought this would be an interesting topic because it's process oriented. So it's not just saying, hey, here's my pick on this game or that game, but there's 50 college games on the slate. The first thing I think we both do is probably process of elimination. We've got our data. We've updated the rushing data. We've updated other data that we both compile. But right away, we put games out of reach. And by that, I mean some of the MAC games for me, some of the other games where I don't have individual team sheets. If they're meeting or expectations, they're not one way or another, I'm going to eliminate them. If my power numbers say there's not a play, I'm going to eliminate them. If there's some injury concerns, I have other games I could get to rather than guessing. And the NCAA seems to be a guessing game on injuries. I'm not going to go with that. So that's the first thing I would look at would be game elimination. Then I would look at key stats. What are the key stats that I'm looking at? Their line of scrimmage data. Who's winning the rushing battle? Who's not winning the rushing battle? If we're talking about games where the spread is anywhere between 0 and 7 points, I'm looking at field goal accuracy. I'm looking at conversion rates in terms of the punt return, flipping the field. I'm looking at strength of schedule. I'm looking at where there could be regression, teams that are plus 10 in turnover ratio, but it seems more random than others, or teams that are minus 10 in turnover ratio. And I'm assessing my July, August performance. Where did I expect the numbers to be and where are the numbers? So Chris, what about you? What are you looking at in terms of the slate when it first comes out?
Well, I match up on some of that, but I'm actually the inverse on a lot because, as we all know, you heavily prepare for every single team, and it's a very long process. Whereas I'm basically I'm not even betting until like week 3 or 4 of NCAA. And I'm just going to work off of current year stats. So I'm not setting expectations or goals like you are. Where we match up similarly is I want to exclude games. There's just too many to go through. So over the years, I've started to exclude teams that pass too much. I find that I can't handicap those well. I do match up with you where you have to look at the line of scrimmage, who's going to control the ball, who's rushing well, who's stopping the rush. I use several strength of schedule sources because I think that that's very important. It'll be important again during bowl season. Another thing I kind of track is I like to track how many road and home games teams have had because that affects the data also, and I allow or adjust each team accordingly if they've played fewer or more home games, depending on the schedule and the difficulty level, and when they played those games. But primarily what I'm trying to do, and I've been really frustrated the last couple of weeks because I come up with a lot of these leans, and then I'll go to somebody like yourself and a couple of other people that I check in. I've got some sports book directors that I can contact for some information and see where their lines are. And what I really want to do is try to get some validation for my leans or strong opinions. And that's kind of backfired on me recently because I've left a lot of winners on the table. And boy, is that frustrating. So I don't know whether there was kind of a loss in confidence from a couple of years back when the scoring elevated and the way I was doing things. I used to bet 35 games on a Saturday, and now I'm certainly around the 5 number, between the 5 and 10 number. Those are some of the things that I do. I've had to change over the last couple of years to. Another thing is I'm not going to bet any games that have a point spread over 21. At least I'm not going to handicap them myself.
How much do you look at hidden data, such as, not just turnovers, but I'm trying to think, we're thinking like fourth quarter data or where starting field position. There was a question that came out on Twitter, for example, on starting field position. How much are you looking at? How much do you read the box scores? I do read the box scores.
No, I do very little box score reading. Honestly, I just don't. I'm going off of team ranking, strength of schedule, the hardcore data stuff. You and I do a rundown of every game, and I freeload off of your sack data when you and a couple of other things that you point out that help me out that I may not be seeing, and a couple of other people that I consult with point out some odds and ends along those lines. Also, what I'm doing is basically getting a very strong starting point of, hey, I would bet these games, but what do the people that are really deep diving into this stuff have to say about each of them?
Now, we passed week 5 in college. That's when our data turns over. That's a very heavy week for me. And last week was an example of a week where I had lighter plays and lighter convictions. My top plays were not at the high level in terms of 3% and so on, because the market adjusted a little quicker than it used to here. You mentioned that you didn't bet that much the first 3 or 4 weeks, which are, week 1 is a big week for me. But it's also one thing I'm finding is, maybe it's because there's so much prep work involved, is after week 2, I'm betting maybe 1 or 2 games early, and that's it, where I've made a mental note after Saturday's games. Check this early line, check that early line. But I am betting far fewer games early than I ever have, even though there are some syndicate line moves early. What are your thoughts in terms of betting early and how difficult? It seems to be more difficult for me than it used to be.
Well, I used to have every single NCAA football game handicapped by the start of the Sunday NFL games. And I used to go down to the Win, and they would post those at halftime, right around halftime of the games. And I would be ready to go. I would bet like 20 games. And it became too frustrating because it's really hard to do all that work in that compressed time. And you can ask any sharp guy, every single person has said the exact same thing. I used to get in there and go 20 for 20, 18 for 20, 19 for 20, getting the best of the number.
Yeah.
And every single week I was like 11 and 9, 9 and 11, 10 and 10. And the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze to keep on, racing down there and taking my time to do that. It was not making that big of a difference. So like you, I'm waiting, and I'm absorbing the injury information, the late breaking information. There's just a lot more moving parts going on in the NCAA than there used to be.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that's slowing me down is the NCAA is a business now. Every year we're talking an average of 25 new coaches. And we talked about this in the summer. It's not just new coaches, it's the 144 new coordinators, which is ridiculous. And to think that slowed down, it hasn't slowed down. There were 29 new coaches. We never had in-season firings of coaches. We've already had 5 this year. It's just skewing the data that I don't want to go to the window so fast and say, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's a hurry up and wait type of. I like it for my process better to not feel rushed. Like
Mhm.
I know there's people that are going to watch this video because I see them tweet out plays right away, and that's I'm doing a little bit of that in the NFL, but uh, I made some like this week. I made at least one mistake that I thought was going to be a for sure play, and it really isn't. And so I'm holding the bag on that a little bit. I just don't want to panic myself and feel like, oh, I got to do this now. Oh, I got to do this now, because that's
Mhm.
when you're making mistakes. That's when you're getting
Yeah.
careless, and there's just so many games and opportunities. It's our choice what to play, and it is certainly better to leave losers on the table than or winners on the table than to add losers. So,
Mhm.
um, kind of the same thought process there. You wanted to move on to what most people consider, um, boring talk. They're sick of hearing it. A lot of people just want to place bets, and um, they don't want the lectures on how they manage their bankroll. What specific questions did you want to bring up on the bankroll management issue?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to tell people how to bet 1% or 2% of bankroll, but what I wanted to discuss is what makes a person, what makes you, what makes myself make a bet that is 1% of bankroll versus 2% of bankroll. So I handicap three ways. I know in the NFL, yours is very metric based. And I think I've introduced a little bit of situational base to your portfolio in terms of standalone revenge games and other statistical data, but it's certainly not the way that you would rely on. Everything is not situational, and you certainly can't have a situation where they're 7-2 on a Tuesday after eating hamburgers on a for lunch or something like that. I mean, don't do that kind of stuff. Base your situations on new coach data. Base your situations on tried and true rushing data. There are some coaches in college, for example, at Iowa, or some systems that have withstood the test of time because an understudy took over, where you could use the rushing data I have for years and years and years and say, if they are installed as a rush pick, Kansas State, for example, they are dynamite in that role, depending on who they're playing and if there's any other situations that are going on. So I'm using situations that are metric based. I'm using some revenge database, and I'm using the metric data, and I'm using power numbers. And how I divide my tiers up is if I have an underdog play where my line is 3.5 points different than the line I can get in college, but I have no other things to support it one way or another, it's probably going to be the last tier of my play. It's going to be a 1% play. Running power rating underdogs, which used to be so unbelievable back in the days of lower scoring, more running the ball, to your point about passing messes things up and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Too many variables. Used to be, if my line was off by 3.5 points in the 1980s, 1990s, 62.5% against the spread. Still only works in the Ivy League and those kind of leagues. But now it's down to 56.5%, which is still a winning proposition. So I don't want to leave those off the table. So whenever I can, I'll make a 1% play on a strictly power rating based play. Unfortunately, favorites, which used to be 56, 57%, even higher, the last 5 years, I use rolling data for 5 years, 51.3% if you took power rating favorites. So it's much better to leave them off the table because you don't win at minus 110 at 51. It means you don't want to go on the other side because that's 48.7%. But I leave power rating favorites off the table unless I have other data. Combination data gets me to a tier 2 or a tier 3. Standalone data gets me just tier 1. So I'm just curious, what makes a 2% versus a 3% versus a 4% play for you?
Well, when we all have to be fortunate enough to meet people that are going to help us learn process and help us with models and such. And the person that I learned to do NCAA through, he preached one important thing. He said, play them all the same. And for a couple of years, I was kind of stubborn because you'd have these games that just look like gold. And I learned in the long run, that guy was right. You like if you're playing contests or you're looking for your best plays, boy, it's just 50-50. You might as well just pick them out of a hat for the games that you're going to come up with in general. So that's the way that I'm looking at NCAA. I'm not looking to bet heavily in NCAA, so I'm basically mid-range betting for the most part. Um, I'll downgrade or upgrade just a little bit. I'm not going to bet 3 times as much on a game, just because it's a 3% or 3-star for me opposed to a 1%. Do you bet 3 times as much on your games?
Not usually. No, I mean, because I have a starting point and it's not that way. There are different. Week one, I will. Week one, I go outside the range when I think I have tremendous value because I think I've done more work than most in July and August to prepare me for week one. And of course, I made those bets in July and August. Week 5, the crossover week, I'll step out a little bit. But then it's not until the bowl week. So what you were saying, I have a lot of flat betting. A lot of the bets are the same size the rest of the season for college, unless there's something that hits both the power rating and tried and true rush data. I mean, there are certain things that push a play up, but if they're not there, then there's going to be a 1.5% and a 2%. There's not going to be a complete clear divide like you're talking about.
I think one of the benefits of waiting later on in the week is that when you've been doing this long enough, you start to smell out things that just don't sit right with certain games. And I use the Iowa-Michigan game stands out. I really liked Iowa early, and by Saturday morning, I just knew it. I just knew it was a loser. Everybody was on it, and just because everybody's on a game doesn't mean it's a loser, but it does seem like you could just bet against those games and actually profit when everybody lines up on the same side. Just an observation on my point. You have viewer feedback question. Why don't you go ahead and expand on what you meant by that?
Well, there was a question that was posed to us on the YouTube channel. Shameless plug, anybody who poses a question on YouTube, we'll answer it at some point. We'll get there, we'll answer it. It may have been, I think it was YouTube, might have even been your Discord channel. But Big Al had a question about buying points and middling, specifically about the Kentucky game, South Carolina. There was some injury news there, and the line really changed, and people were undervaluing it or overvaluing it. The line went from 10 to 6.5. I think it even closed lower. I think it closed 3.5. When do you buy back? And the thing of it is, of course, middles used to be more prevalent when all the books weren't moving on air and stuff like that, and you had individual bookies. To me, you should always take a side on a middle. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but there's got to be one side of the seesaw when you're riding one of those things as a child that's a little higher or a little lower than the other. So if you want to buy back, because if you're betting numbers and you're not betting teams, and the correct number to you is 7 and you got 10, and now it's 3.5, so the correct number seesaws in the other direction, you're going to buy some back. There's no question about that. But to me, I would have a conviction one way or the other. I tend to do, if I'm doing a middle, 2/3 on one side and 1/3 on the other, whether it be for a prop that changes a lot or whether it be on a game or a total that changes a lot. I'm still going to have an opinion on the game. I bet the game for a reason to start out, unless it was anticipating a bad line. And that can happen too. Those are the kinds of things we would race to the window week 1 and 2 in the college, week 3 in the college football season. And I still do that on occasion. I bet a lot of lines that I think are off after week 1 in college. And you have a middle in mind when you're doing that. But this time of the year, it's really hard to have a middle in mind. I would say take a position, first of all. And if the line changes drastically, then you have to decide what your position really is.
Well, a middle is essentially a hedge. So
Yeah.
they're basically the exact same term. So um, when you have that kind of value, why would you want to give it back in a situation that isn't also a positive
Yeah.
EV play?
Yeah.
Uh, so you don't just sit there and bet both sides just for the sake of doing that. You want that second wager to be positive EV by itself. Is that a wager that you would place by yourself? Just the other night, somebody was sharing with me. He put himself in a great position of getting like a 3 point middle. He creatively, leveraged two parlays into that. And I'm like, well, yeah, you've got the 3 point middle, but putting them into each other is now diluting the value of what you would have had with each of those bets separate
Mhm.
on their own. So while that was creative, he's putting himself in a situation where he cost himself value, and
Yeah.
that's the one thing you have to remember with these hedgings or middles. Numbers don't land as often as you think they do, uh, and you have to know the real value of these numbers, quite frankly, to do it properly.
When you make a bet, you should always be thinking of return on investment based on your numbers, based on your metrics. When you take plus 10 on the game, what are what are the chances of winning? What's the percentage of winning? What's the juice you laid? Probably 110 or somewhere in that. So you have a 56% chance of winning, you have 55 if the sample size was 100 or whatever. If you're going to get 3 points the other way, what's your percentage of winning that? Maybe it's just 50-50 because you already took a side. So why would you take the other side if it was just 50-50? So I like what you said about the value in terms of just don't take the other side for the sake of taking it.
Well, that's,
Same.
you get into a situation where, yeah, you might have had the right side to start, and the line moves so much that you have the right side to buy back.
Mm-hmm.
It's moved too much. So, uh, but you got to know, how much is too much. And I agree with what you said with, yeah, if you got, the real strong best of it, buy back a quarter or a third of it. Don't get carried away. Don't buy it all back, because you have implied value already, baked in. Um, I put teasers on there. You mentioned something about teasers. Um,
Yeah, there was a question about buying points and teases. First of all, if we're talking NCAA, never tease. I mean, that's my philosophy.
the
Um,
only the only circumstance that a teaser is worth considering. Let me repeat that. The only, we don't tease college football. The only time that you could actually consider it is when you have an extremely low total,
yeah.
and you just know there's going to be less variance. I mean, high total games, anything can happen, but if you've got somehow a game and it's in the 30s, and you want to tease college, all right, well, that's not the worst thing in the world. It's still not good, but those are the only circumstances to consider it. And as far as buying points in the NCAA, there are places that sell every single number for 10 cents. So what does that tell you? It's you don't buy points in NCAA. Now, some will claim that the 3 and the 7 are worth just a little bit more, and there is value at buying it at 10 cents. I don't see it. I just don't think it's there. I've seen numbers that say the opposite. So
Yeah.
I would not be buying points in the NCAA. Uh, I can't even remember the last time I bought a point in the
Yeah.
NCAA, frankly.
There's two thoughts on this. Number one is the overtime rules in the NCAA are interesting. Third overtime, everybody goes for two. If there's a spread of 1.5 on the game, my new advice, see what you think about this, is take the money line. If you've got a kind of a low spread 1.5, 2, if that game goes to overtime, you're better off taking a minus 120 on the money line than laying 1.5 points, which is generally what you might see.
That's just coming to you now, Ron?
No, it's coming to me to give that advice. It's coming. I think I've known that for a while. In fact, I think I escaped with a game last week because of that. I'm trying to think which game that was.
I absolutely did not want to lay 1.5.
Kansas State game, I think.
I'm always looking for the best money lines. I absolutely, in fact, I've spent 25 minutes on an NFL game trying to figure out the equations of point spread versus money line, and I really want to gravitate more toward money lines when possible. I agree.
Yeah. One thing I should add to my teaser thing, because I completely agree. Glad you brought it up. Don't tease high totals. Don't tease games with high variance, weirdo coaches, all these things. But maybe we can add one in college. You are perfectly allowed every time Iowa plays to tease.
Yeah, you know what? You're damn right.
That, they could set football back about 100 years with the way they run their offense, but and their defense tends to outscore their offense, or their kicker tends to outscore the rest of their team. So if you say, I'm sorry, Ron, you're going to tease Iowa, I'm going to say, you got it. You got my full endorsement.
Let's apply that to NFL, because the rules are different in the NFL. Obviously, if you're watching this show, you already know if you're teasing, you really need to be going 100% through the 3 and 100% through the 7. And that's your first step on the teasers. Somebody in the Discord channel asked, show that question. Teasers has been a big loser this year for NFL. So you have to be really careful. And, that comes from higher scoring games and more variance. So the value of the teaser is a little diluted the higher scoring the game is. And as you mentioned on Twitter, what are you doing teasing a game in its 50s? So just some things to be aware of. You can't just blanket bet these long teasers through the 3 and the 7s anymore, because they just aren't coming through. And there'll probably be some positive regression toward them winning here, because they've been losing so often this year. But even last night, a lot of people don't realize that Kansas City landed on 1. A loser, if you lost the first leg of the teaser and you had Kansas City land on 1, that's a push.
At some books. I've seen the language
in the vast majority
wrong.
Of books.
Yeah.
But you have to check. Apparently DraftKings has the hose you policy of, if you lose 1, then it's done. And that's painfully unfair, because if you win 1 and tie 1, you get nothing. So that's the reason why a loser and a push is a push for the vast majority of the books. And people need to check their house rules to see what the policy is there. As far as buying points, if they're offering to sell you points, there's a reason, because they're making money on you. And I don't know a single place that it's worth it to buy to a 3. You need to start looking for alternatives and taking a plus 2.5 plus money. You need to figure out which is the better, is minus 3 even money better than minus 2.5, minus 120. You need to know those answers. Is this money line going to be better than this point spread? So that's what I've been working out on one game, because it's all tricky, because just a few cents difference on the money line or the, what you can get off the juice part of the point spread, are constantly changing, and you need to tweak it.
We've mentioned this many times over the summer and so on, but I come from a time where it used to be even money for 6-point teases.
Yeah.
And the spreads of games used to be 41-42 instead of 45-46. Well, everything's changed in that regard now, and it's really advantage book instead of advantage us, the
You can't
handicapper.
you can't be laying more than minus 120 on two team teasers in the NFL. NCAA teasers should be no juice, and you still shouldn't bet them.
Yeah.
But what the better play is in the NFL for teasers is to go to a 3-team teaser at plus 180. You're getting better odds adding that third team at the plus 180 than laying the minus 120 on two teams. So something to consider there. Trying to think the getting back to the buying numbers, even all the numbers are changing and evolving. The 1 and the 2 are more valuable than they used to be. The 4 is less valuable. The 6 is more valuable. The 8 is more valuable. So that's taking away from the value of the 3 and the 7. Obviously, the 3 is still landed on the most at like 14%. But here's the thing you have to look at. Just because it lands 14% on the 3, how often does it land on the 3 when it's lined 3? So it's really easy to, everybody loves to share this data of the frequency land rate, but how often is the game lined 7 that lands 7? And these are the things you have to know to value this stuff. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, there was a season where the 5 landed, that games lined 5 landed or touched 5 at any point during the week landed more often than games that were lined 3 and landed 3. It was like actually about 4 years ago, I think. Just absolutely incredulous.
You think about what happened in the Atlanta Tampa Bay game. Atlanta down 14 scores and then goes for 2. So now you're dealing with a 6-point game or an 8-point game. And as analytics get used and completely misused from time to time because it's so situation specific and so team versus team specific, that's another topic that coaches don't understand. But they're taking spreads off of 6, off of 7 and making it 8 and 6. And then if you have 8 and then you kick a field goal, that's 5. Or if you have 8, you get a touchdown. Then it puts the 2 in play. You're absolutely right. And people need to know that 3 is no longer the desired number if you're going to have these wacky things happen, including missed extra points to begin with that puts you off a number, puts you 1 and 2, or going for 2 like the Raiders did with 4 minutes, 27 seconds left. And now you're not in a push situation where 3 could happen. It's all over the place now.
The most frequently landed on numbers are 3, 7, and then I think it's 6.
6
and
would be next.
Believe it or not, it's 10. 10 is becoming a more valuable number than it used to be. And then you're getting down to the 1 and the 2 land about 4% of the time. The 4 about 4% of the time. The 8 is a little bit lower than that. 9, which used to be less than 1% of the time, has even gone up to probably 1 or 1.5%. So that's just an update on that sort of stuff. I want to talk about. Are we done on your topics?
I think so.
Okay,
go for it.
Let's start it off here and go. What's going on? How is the extreme variance we're seeing with dumb, just horrible refereeing and dumb plays and just variables that are popping up in these games that make some of these games, look like a bad B movie. I mean, I don't understand how you can have that Brady roughing the passer Sunday, and then they call an even worse one the very next day. That they're not even on their best behavior to not repeat what happened. You had the 2 worst calls in NFL history almost on back-to-back days. what are you doing anything differently at this point?
Yeah, brandy, Kahlua and milk, gin and tonic, those things help. But no, seriously, one of the things I do, which is interesting, is I check referee assignments before each week. I do that because there are certain referees, and you can pinpoint what they are to the underdog, to how many penalties they call in the home team versus visitor team, and so on. And the referee who made the call in the Tampa Bay game has consistently graded out, in my opinion, as one of the worst referees in the game. And he should have been demoted a long time ago. And he's an embarrassment, to be honest. And that adds a variance in handicapping that bothers me. And if he's reffing a game, it may affect my bet size. I hate to say that, but I don't like high variability when I'm making a play.
Well, and we talked about it ahead of that Thanksgiving game with Dallas and the Raiders last year, where we knew that referee crew. I can't pronounce the guy's name, but he's the son of Hakilo.
Yeah, Hockley.
36 penalties in that game. I mean, it's just ridiculous how these people want to just, be, they need to be at the front and center of the game. The head referee last night has a history of where Kansas City has a very high winning percentage and the Raiders have a very low winning percentage. And you can look up these records to see how they're treating different teams, home teams, road teams, overs and unders. And it is definitely worth checking into. And I don't do it religiously like I probably should.
Well, it's interesting because this came up in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. We talked about this great penalty prop with Kansas City and the overreaction with so many penalties. You knew that this next game would have, or so few, and you knew it would have many. But Kansas City is an interesting study. I'm glad you brought that up. Kansas City, at least 3 times last night, if people didn't see it, they lined up offsides and it wasn't called. Kansas City, believe it or not, has a history of lining up offsides. So if you match a referee who calls that kind of stuff to a Kansas City game, believe it or not, it matters. And as handicappers, we're looking for tiny bit of edges in handicapping. And that's what we're looking for. I mean, there's no other way to say it.
Do you think they do that on purpose because they know they can get away with it? Or do you think that they're just obtuse to their surroundings?
It's a habit they've had under Andy Reid for whatever reason, or maybe their defensive line coach, but you can see the helmet, especially a half yard offside on some of these plays. They also have a tendency to anticipate the snap count and go offsides a lot. We saw that in that Super Bowl 4 or 5 times. There are certain teams that, especially teams that have been coached by the same coach, same positional coach for a long period of time, they don't change their stripes. And it's a Kansas City thing.
And I just want to, I want to bring this up. This is current. The Rams. Actually, this comes into one of the questions, okay? Somebody asked, the thing that annoys me the most about talking heads on TV and radio. Why don't you go ahead and answer that first?
What annoys me the most about talking heads on the radio? Well, they don't say anything of value to me. I don't know. I hardly ever listen to them. It's kind of going one ear and out the other. I'm watching the red zone more often than not. So they're switching to each game or whatever. I don't know if anything annoys me the most. So why don't you go first? Maybe it'll enlighten me.
You sit there and you listen to pods, you watch shows, and there's a definite shortage of qualified people in the media to discuss betting in general. There is absolutely an undeniable requirement from major media outlets that appearance, delivery are far more important to them than content. They don't want anything to do with the best handicapper in the world that, doesn't have any on-air personality whatsoever and bores people. It doesn't matter what the content is. So, that's one thing that bothers me is just the people that I tell these people, I literally reach out to some people and say, quit saying ROI. It's not ROI, it's profit. And they don't correct it. And there's other things. It's like they'll recommend teasing, a 6 to a 12. Yeah, there's a lot of people on various shows that are giving bad advice, bad bets, and there's no accountability. I mean, these people should, if they are on a show giving out picks, it should be required for them to reference their previous record and their history, because there's just no accountability. What really, specifically, I want to apply this to the Rams. I got to sit through all these different shows where these people bring up DVOA and EPA, and they make it sound like that's how you handicap. These are the key numbers, the key data that you need. Well, then explain to me how on all these other games you're trying to justify why you're betting them. How come it doesn't come into play when you're betting the 26th team in the league, the Rams, laying 5 points to the number 6 team via the DVOA that you reference every week? How do you just ignore that for 2 weeks in a row? It was the same situation with San Francisco the week before. These guys love the Rams. Where's your DVOA this week to support your Rams? Nowhere. They'll get blown up by San Francisco. Same thing, rinse, repeat the following week with Dallas. They do the same thing. How can you sit there and justify in any way, shape, or form wasting my time listening to you bring up DVOA and EPA, and then you're going to sit there and bet the number 26 team laying 5 against the number 6 team without even referencing these stats that are so important to justify all your other games? That's the kind of stuff that drives me nuts.
Well, it goes in one ear and out the other with me on those people, because they're not doing as much preparation. Maybe they have a bet on it, maybe they don't. I'm just worried about my own personal handicapping. And you referenced a game that I had the wrong side on, but it wasn't because I underestimated the Rams. We talked about the Rams a lot. It's because I underestimated Dallas. That was my problem in that particular game. There are some teams that I'm clearly right on, but I didn't expect Dallas to perform the way they did in that particular game. So whatever they said about the Rams, I knew about the Rams. This, for me, it was a bet against Dallas, and I was wrong.
I think the point of this is that. And I used to have this problem years ago when, I was invited on to do segments advocating a game. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it because I would waste my time grabbing data and numbers to support my team that have nothing to do with why I'm betting it. But I'm supposed to fill airtime and entertain people with different stuff. When I hear these guys pulling out, 1 or 2 stats and making it sound like it's so important, and those 2 stats are equally weighted with another 45 to 50 in my metrics, I just sit there and roll my eyes and, how do they even spit this crap out? I mean, it's irrelevant. I am 100% sure it is BS, and I got to listen to it every single week.
I think you just have to filter out what's meaningful to you and what's not meaningful. And if they want to go ahead and say, this is the way it is, and maybe some people subscribe to that and you believe completely opposite, maybe you get a better number at the window. It doesn't bother me as much, I guess, because I'm pretty much tuning it out to begin with.
I know. And actually I do also, because I listen to all this stuff and it doesn't really annoy me all that much because They may have some other tidbits that I'm able to pick up on. I don't care how good a handicapper is or whatever the media personality is. I like to just get that filter of that type of perspective
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
as many different ways as possible, because it helps me read a market, understand where a market may go, etc. Uh, what percentage? Like, so we've gone heads up. It's not uncommon for us to go heads up. I don't think we ever change each other's mind on a game. We might say, okay, I'm going to skip that game. But the relationship that we have, you're primarily power numbers, I'm primarily metrics. Is there a percentage that you weigh each? How do you combine the two?
Well, it's like I said with the college, there were three primarily things I look at: situationally, power ratings, and metrics. Metrics would be first, power ratings second, and situationally third. Now, some situations like that first game, standalone Chargers against the Raiders, was an incredibly strong situation to me, having lost this, 70 minutes, cost them the playoffs the year before. Better team, they added all those players and all that other stuff week one. That situation to me trumped everything else that went on. But at this point in the season, once we crossed over the data, the metrics would be number one and the power ratings would be number two. And power rating favorites to me aren't that important for reasons I mentioned, is because they're hitting 51.3% according to my numbers. But they're guidelines to me to make sure that I'm not playing on a team that I'm losing 3 points of value or 2.5 points of value. Because if I'm doing that, I'm putting myself in a deeper hole. So I won't play a team if the power ratings say I should be on the other team. So, that's where the power ratings come into play. They're great guidelines to me, but I'd much rather use the actual on-field metric data.
Yeah, and I was talking to somebody last night, and they admitted that they had the Dallas favored in their metrics against the Rams. And I'm like, how the hell can you bet the opposite side? How is that just not a no play for you? If you think, regression is due to the positive for the Rams and you're not a believer in Dallas, how do you switch over to the other side? And as you referenced, you just won't play it. And that's the way I am. I'm never going to switch to the opposite side. If my metrics have, a team favored by enough to make it a play, maybe you can get me off of the play for various situational purposes and such, but I'm not going to bet the other side.
And the first thing I would look at, especially college, is when the line first comes out and my line is off, I look at me and say, did I compute this wrong? Where am I missing? What am I missing? Are there 18 players out because of whatever reason? If I can't find a reason why my power rating is off, then it's a power rating play. But the first thing I have to do, because I'm computing 131 college power ratings and 32 NFL, is make sure I'm not making a mistake. So once, that's an important step. Do self-evaluation first.
I posted something on Twitter regarding look-ahead games, and got a fair amount of response on that. And you gave a similar but more detailed response, whereas the original tweet basically said, I'm sick and tired. Or actually, it was a DM to me that I posted where a guy said, show me the freaking data on these look-ahead games. That's all that's another media pet peeve of somebody else's. And I kind of agree with it is, okay, look ahead games. Now in college, I think it applies. In NFL, I don't think it applies. I think it's ignorance and stupidity to sit there and worry about it, except in a handful of key incidents, like as you brought up, the opening, game, primetime, national TV, revenge in mind. What are your feelings on the look ahead games in general?
Well, I agree with you at college. You have to situationally think about that because everybody's trying to get into the Final Four and the playoffs and the divisional races and so on. And these are 18 to 22-year-olds and some combustible coaches. Just think of Dana Holgerson at Houston. The guy is more combustible than your gasoline tank or whatever. So you have to watch out for some of these emotional coaches Rex Ryan, I think, used to put too much into the Jets versus New England game, and he didn't prepare as well for the next game. But mostly it's not a relevant factor in the NFL. It's your own body that tells you that there's a letdown after a big game. It's more of a letdown than a look ahead. I don't think anybody looks ahead. I think you play the game that's next. And if you're not properly coached, if you're not playing the team that's next on your schedule and learning about their strengths and weaknesses and what passes work against them and what blitzes work, for me, it's not so much a look ahead. It's making sure your team isn't flat off an emotional performance.
Well, I think we can agree that in college, there's such a thing as a dream crusher game. And, some of the matchups in NCAA this week, are potential dream crushers where you have undefeated teams playing undefeated teams. And it's pretty well known that you really have to factor that into your handicapping when one of those teams goes down and they realize, we're not going to the promised land. What about NFL? I believe that in some cases it could happen. I think teams can respond poorly the following week off of bizarre results, in a given week. What are your thoughts there?
I would agree, but I think it's a handful of cases, like a key divisional game. Like if Indy, Tennessee, they play the second one, there's a lot of pressure on the team that lost the first game head-to-head to win the second game. And if they don't win that second game, it's deflating. You can't get over that, especially if it's a Monday game and you lose, and then you have a short week of preparation the next week and you have to leave that by, or if it's a last-second referee decision and the coach has to let it go. So you have to read the tea leaves a little bit. For the most part, I don't factor that in, but there are a handful of times that you could do that based on how the game ended or how it played out.
There were a lot of people on Pittsburgh last week, and the one stat that I did put out someplace is that people don't realize, they thought Buffalo was a look-ahead situation to Kansas City. They thought Dallas was a look-ahead to Philadelphia. They both won. The Buffalo situation is you're talking about a double-digit favorite. There hasn't been a year since 2013. The double-digit favorites have not been profitable at a high rate. We're talking 56.8% or higher each of those years. So you cannot just dismiss these double-digit favorites. They're covering at a profitable rate. So just a comment that I wanted to make there. You don't touch the double-digit favorites in the least. You might take a double-digit dog, right?
It's really like, again, you don't want to get we talked about Buffalo. They're by far my highest power-rated team, and we talked about not getting in front of the moving train. There are other double-digit favorites that maybe aren't as deserving as double-digit favorites. They're just playing the Houstons of the world or somebody else that maybe it depends on if they came off a divisional game or whatever. I would tend to play an occasional double-digit dog, but I just don't like to get in the way of these high rollers like Buffalo. And to me, Pittsburgh was a play last week. But it would have to be the smallest of plays because you'd have to say that Kenny Pickett brought some variance to the table, that Pittsburgh's defense would somehow slow down Josh Allen, but it had nothing at all to do with a look-ahead situation. Again, Buffalo has no reason to look ahead anybody, especially since they weren't even leading the division, right? They were 3-1 tied with Miami. Unless you're 5-0 and the next team is 2-3, which has happened in a couple of divisions over the last few years, you don't have that margin of error that you can look past a team in the NFL. There's only 17 games.
So I want to ask you something off the cuff. We already have our rematch this week with Jacksonville, Indianapolis, so that's an interesting dynamic in that game. But are there one or two teams that you've upgraded or downgraded, above and beyond what you would have expected?
I'm looking at my list now. I still can't believe that Washington isn't downgraded. Every week they seem to be played, and I just don't understand it. I'm just so much different than what I'm seeing every week, and they saved me money last week because they were in such a good category if there was a proper line, but my line was 4 points off what it should be. Apparently not, and of course they could have won the game, but they don't have a great leadership at quarterback.
Well, and they don't have great leadership at coach when he's
calls them out
his quarterback. So
I think I have to take a second look at the New York Giants. Coaching does matter a little bit and so on. They put themselves in a position to win. I'm willing to take that second look at the New York Giants and say something's clicking. The new coach has them buying in. He's good. We knew he would be good. Adam Chernoff, let's give him some credit in case he listens or watches this show. He told me to buy into the New York Giants this year. I said, I'm buying in, but I'm going to buy in 2023. So maybe I did miss the boat a little bit. I think they've been lucky a little bit, but maybe they've created their own luck because they're limiting the stupid mistakes that the previous regime has had. So I would say that would be one team. I don't know if I have another team. What about you?
Oh, Indianapolis is a legitimate disappointment. We'll have to see how they respond once they get Leonard back into that lineup, because Indianapolis is not the same without Leonard. Pittsburgh's not the same without Watt.
Yeah.
So those are some dynamics that can change. I'm not giving up on Jacksonville yet. What I don't like is there was talk that Trevor Lawrence has won everywhere, high school, college. He gets to the NFL and he's starting to finally, reach some obstacles. And he's the type of guy that's pouting. He's not, amongst the players. He'll sit by himself and just have a crappy look on his face. And, that's a bad sign for a quarterback that I'm going to keep an eye on to see if somehow the word gets to him, hey, grow up, man up here, and show us that you're a leader and quit pouting. I'm very interested to see how he responds because that criticism has got to get back to him, I would imagine.
Okay, I didn't hear that particular one. I know there was a Discord question about buying high or buying low on Jacksonville. The thing of it is, and we questioned it a little bit last week on the Friday show, is that Jacksonville hasn't earned the right to be a 7-point favorite or 7.5-point favorite. They've earned the right to be improved via roster coaching and so on. But winning as a dog when you're not expected to win, with a better roster, better coach, like the New York Giants have done, I give Jacksonville credit for that. So I think if you're thinking whether or not, or if you're asking us or asking me whether or not Jacksonville is still a play-on team, yes, but only as a dog in situations where the matchup metrics say so. I'm not willing to lay more than 3 points with them right now until I see that they could close the deal. And like you said, if Lawrence is still learning not to make mistakes, it's an improved group, but it's not an elite wide receiver group. You can't name their tight ends. Their offensive line is average. I mean, they're still dealing with the roster mess that was 2020 and 2021. I think it's baby steps.
We're going to wrap this up in a few minutes. Let's try to just bop into some quick hitting questions that we had in the Discord channel. You said you wanted to comment on this regarding New England, or the England travel.
Yeah. Well, were they the team? They were one of the teams with a negative rush differential that we may have talked about in our seasonal previews.
Actually, the question was referencing the England travel.
Oh, the England travel, not New England. Okay.
Right. You can comment on the New England travel if you'd like.
Though. Yeah. Okay. Well, the England travel would be non-existent to me because we don't have a large sample size. You phrased that question to me last week, I think, and I told you, we basically have a sample size, somebody said, of about 5, where teams actually played the next week. But this year is going to be the real crucial year. So we saw Minnesota and New Orleans, and New Orleans covered, which I appreciate, against Seattle, and Minnesota won their game, but they did not cover that game. So, I don't think it's a big deal as far as the travel. Somebody said if you went overseas, if you go over water, your body type, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go through
It's
all that.
affecting injuries, injured players. It swells up
Yeah. So I don't know.
injuries, and it delays your recovery time. But it's as far from Miami to London as it is from Miami to Seattle. So approximately.
I'd rather go with metrics.
Now, for me, I don't really give a crap. I do want to point out, since it kind of touches on the subject, that San Francisco this week, for the 5th time, is staying in West Virginia, staying on the East Coast. They request these back-to-back games, which is smart because they're 4-0 doing this process. So they have worse luck when they get back home, though. They fall flat on their face when they get back to San Francisco. So remember that next week. Let's see what else we have here. What is this one? Oh, ever read a book you thought was useful for sports betting, strategy, psychological aspects of gambling, etc.?
I have a way, way, way back book, and I don't have the name of it. I sort of have the name of it. It's the first book I read when I was in college, from Larry Merchant, who is more known for his boxing commentary and stuff like that. But he wrote a book called The National Football Lottery. Very hard to find. I got it in paperback 40 years ago or whatever. It's a fascinating book at the look at Las Vegas, at the look at the pioneers of the guys who set the lines, Bob Martin, his life as a bettor, all kinds of stuff. It's called The National Football Lottery by Larry Merchant. And I still think that's a great book to this day.
I'm looking for some. Oh, here it is. Huh. I'm looking at this, the sports book. Let me see. I guess this is worth it to share. Let me, how do I screen share here? Boy, am I inept. Okay.
Live TV, folks.
This will be worth it. Okay, so I can do this, but I'm going to swing this over. Sportsbook Management, a guide for the legal bookmaker. Have you ever seen that one?
I have not. Who wrote that one?
Roxy Roxburgh and Mike Roden. And
okay.
As you can see, that this is some old time stuff, but has it basically gets into all the different ways that you can bet, the hold percentages, how to compute that sort of stuff. The true payoff versus implied payoffs, a lot of stuff that you need to know if you're going to be in the bookmaking business. And I don't believe this is in print anymore, and it's nearly impossible to get. But that's a pretty unusual type reference sort of material. The other thing that I might recommend is, going to like Wizard of Odds and some of these other sites that anally describe the value and computations involved in parlays and teasers and other forms of betting. Though that's where you're going to get the kind of the benefit. But it's such a constantly evolving scenario that we're in. I can't think of a real book that stands out to me that, I can think about it in poker. I just can't think about it in sports betting, quite frankly. I think what has benefited me the most was a non-sports related book, The Power of Habit. I've listened to the book on tape twice. It's just compelling. It's probably one of the favorite things I've ever read or listened to, because they take the time to weave actual real life stories and applying, how our subconscious works, how our subconscious is reinforced. Their stat, when you really think about it, it sounds really nuts, but pretty much between 40 and 50% of what we do each day is a habit. I mean, if you really look at how much stuff you do each and every day and think about the repetition involved in what you do on a day in and day out basis, you'll be shocked at how mundane your life really is, based on how you have these habits from day to day. And the reason I bring that up is because it applies to sports. If you don't have habits with your process, with your betting, with how you're going to react, with how you manage your money, and several other things I'm at a loss for. You need habits in everything related to sports betting, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, you said it earlier when we talked about we're now betting less in college on Sunday and Monday and stuff like that, and even in the NFL. It's because year in and year out, for all the years I've been doing this, I don't cut corners. It's methodical is the word that I use to go through my thing. I've got my sheets. It's ready to go. Here it is in terms of every NFL game. My line, what the line is, the over-unders, some notes, some metrics that are right on here and so on. And every week is the same. Every year is the same, going through it, how I record data, how I get ready for the next week. And I'm not rushing that. I'm not cutting corners. I want to sometimes because it's not the fastest of process, but it's what works for me. And whatever works for anybody who's watching this, make it a habit.
Well, I can't agree more. And I think that there's a little bit of a generational gap with this, because I have a really, really hard time. It's really easy to do all that stuff when you're winning. Yeah. But when you go through these rough spells, you don't want to do figures. You don't want to do deep dives into record keeping and analysis. It's just so much harder. And that's why it's so important to maintain the habits that you have, Ron, because there are some things I do where I don't have great habits, and it certainly works against me.
Well, you seem a little less stressed today, which is great. But, if somebody has a losing week, we all have them, and it is particularly gnawing at you the way it happened, delay something by a day. Do the same things that you would do, but instead of rushing to it on Sunday and Monday, make it Monday and Tuesday, and just take one extra day before you start the process. Keep the process going, but just decompress for a day. There's nothing wrong with that.
Somebody asked me somewhere, and I responded, about what do you do when you're just in these horrible, you've had a horrible week or a horrible run. And I think my advice is the opposite of what you would expect. And I always recommend do something nice. Go out for a great dinner, expensive dinner. Do something that really just makes you feel good, and spoil yourself, and purge the dwelling and the dissatisfaction for a few hours, and just do something different that's just going to relax you. I believe that that's the number one way to kind of get through this stuff.
Yeah, you just want to refresh. Get refreshed, and you'd be surprised after a good day, like you said, whatever it is, whether you're out hiking in the wilderness, doing whatever it is, after that, how much more recharged you get.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the value of hiking, walking. It gets the brain thinking better. You can multitask with podcasts. It's just really good. It's so much better than sitting on the couch or in an office. You can do work on the road. We're at that point. We're going to be back on Friday with week 5 of the Inside Blitz.
I have the games for you: Baltimore and the New York Giants, which is suddenly a very interesting game.
That is an interesting game this week.
And then Carolina and the Rams. These are two teams that are going in the wrong direction. So we haven't formulated our thoughts yet, but when we get to that, it's kind of interesting to discuss these two games. That's Friday.
And we will weave in, we're going to try to weave in questions and topics on both of the shows when we can. The Tuesday shows, we've been winging it and trying to just give everybody the unexpected as often as possible, because there's a zillion shows that can run through all the games. But to Ron and I, process is far more important than running, giving a rundown of week 5 games. As far as I'm concerned, there are times where we want to check in on, quarterlies and just, at certain times of the season, to address certain issues. But process is number one of importance. And this is Ron and I talking amongst ourselves. We didn't do any prep here. None. We're just talking amongst ourselves and BSing. And that's what we want people to see. We're not creating content for media. We're not selling anything. We're not expecting anything. We're doing it because it's helping us. And we hope it's helping you. Any other thoughts there, Ron, before we sign off?
I think we're good. This Tuesday, we got a couple more days. We'll talk a little bit, the two of us. We will go through some games, and then looking forward to Friday. Everything's good.
Okay, well, happy you were able to overhand serve again today. Believe it or not, this old fart can beat me in tennis, and I played tennis as a youngster, so it really annoys me. Anyway, we'll see you guys again on Friday. Thanks for joining.